So I made a similar video to this under my other username, Ningshan, but I'm just making this video again because I think there needs to be some balance against the sort of outrage that we've been seeing with this thing, which, as you can see with the title of this video, or at least in the description, is about the racist kid on the Jimmy Kimmel Show. Basically, a few days back, there was a kid appeared on the US comedian satirist Jimmy Kimmel appeared on his show, who came out with "kill all the Chinese." Now, of course, that's quite an extreme comment, and it's a little unsettling to think a child could come up with something like that. It's wrong, okay, that's it, it's wrong. No one, I don't think anyone disputes that. But I'm getting a little bit fed up of seeing this sort of very thin-skinned Chinese reaction every time they're insulted. You know, the United States of America is insulted every single day, and all over the Arab world, and perhaps beyond, there's people who shout death to America. But the average American doesn't go out and get into fiery protests to the nearest Arab embassy. I just find these Chinese nationalists to be so arrogant. It's not that I don't think they should have any reaction. I mean, if I was Chinese, I would feel a little uneasy about it. But let's be clear, this was a kid. This was a kid. If there's any issue, it's perhaps where they're getting that information from, in which case it's a parenting issue. Maybe Jimmy Kimmel should have responded a little bit better. Maybe he shouldn't have came across like he was endorsing what the child was saying. But Jimmy Kimmel himself didn't say anything racist. Like I say, maybe he could have been a little bit more professional, but he himself did not say anything racist. And these self-righteous people are demanding his resignation. These self-righteous people who are enjoying American freedom. I'm just sick and tired of seeing Chinese nationalists enjoy the freedom of the West to do nothing but attack the West. And it just really pisses me off. You know, if these people don't like America, why don't they just go back to China, where they can enjoy all the freedom of speech that they want? I'm sorry, but that's how I feel about it. I'm not condoning what the kid said, but far worse things have been said about Westerners in China. The CCTV anchor, Yang Rui, a few years back, because a few foreigners had behaved badly in Beijing, he then came out with an extremely racist comments I should say, a racist rant in fact, about all Westerners. Now, where was the Chinese protest against that? No one seemed to care. There was a little bit of online ridicule, and a few Chinese said, oh, he's giving China a bad image, but there was no sort of like, this man's a racist, he shouldn't be representing us. No, there was none of that. So I really don't understand their mindset. All I can really get from this is they're probably Chinese nationalists, or Chinese supremacists is the word I'm looking for. I.e., it's okay for them to be outraged when there's racism leveled against them, even if it's from a stupid kid. But whenever it's a Chinese person doing the racism, they don't care. Or they'll make excuses like, oh, that person's just rude. You know, it works both ways. And I came across a girl, I don't know if she's Chinese American. I couldn't respond directly, because the user, I don't know, blocked comments or something, and she'd written her name in Chinese characters, so I couldn't respond directly to her. But the sort of comments I was seeing just really represented the sort of arrogance I'm talking about. She was talking about whites in this very generalizing manner, like we're all racists. Now again, I emphasize what the kid said was awful. Certainly if I had a son who came out with something like that, I'd discipline him. But let's be clear, it is just a kid. And all they're doing is turning this into a much bigger issue than it really should be. Now I could understand the outrage if this was, say, for example, an American politician, someone in a position of authority, but this was just a stupid kid. And this sort of self-righteous indignation about, oh, look how racist America is. Well, let's start with, if you're going to talk about racism, let's talk about racism in China. Let's talk about Lu Jing, the black Chinese girl who received vicious racism on Sina Weibo, and other Chinese social networking sites a few years back for no other reason than she was black. From what I understand, she had a Chinese mother and a black father, but she was fully Chinese. She was born in China, Chinese girl. She just happened to be darker skinned, and because of that, she received all sorts of vitriolic abuse, like, oh, she's not a real Chinese, she should kill herself. So I'm sick and tired of seeing this hypocrisy, and it really pisses me off that these people can't seem to understand just how hypocritical they come across. And frankly, these people make China look like it's a land of fanatical nationalists. Now, I'm not going to do what they do. I'm not going to say all Chinese people are like this. In fact, I know not all Chinese people are like this. I know that. But a lot of Chinese people are, especially overseas. And a lot of people, frankly, overseas also happen to be the privileged Chinese who can afford to go overseas. But it really irks me off that they're so hypocritical. You know, it wouldn't bother me so much that if they were complaining about racism against Chinese people, if they were consistent and spoke out against all racism, but they don't. They couldn't care less if a Chinese racist comes out with some generalizing vitriol against Americans or British or French. They couldn't care less. And it seems to be their mindset changes. As soon as they leave China, then they suddenly understand what racism means. But on Chinese shores, you don't hear people talking about racism in China. In fact, I don't think there's even a Mandarin word for that. And to me, that just demonstrates astonishing hypocrisy. And it's times like this, I think the West is far more tolerant, because we, in the United States, in the UK, freedom of expression is a very important part of our democracy. So these people have the right to make those protests. No one's stopping them. Now, I guarantee you, if a group of Westerners decided to hold a protest about Yang Rui's racism in Beijing, they would be rounded up and arrested. So my message to those Chinese nationalists is, before you get self-righteous and shout about racism, look at your own backyard, look at China. And before you accuse me of being racist, I'm not even going to respond to that. You know, I'll condemn all racism. Racism is racism is racism. And racism against Chinese people is wrong. Okay? I've seen people in the West come out with racist comments about Chinese people, and I've confronted those people. I've said that's wrong. So why can't these Chinese nationalists do the same thing whenever it's Chinese people doing it? Because whenever racism occurs in China, they don't acknowledge it. All we hear is, oh well, they just make excuses. They say, oh, it's just rude people. They never acknowledge it is what it is, which is racism. So I'm just fed up with this hypocrisy. And I think, frankly, a lot of the world is. A lot of people outside China see this. And it isn't just Westerners. I've seen other Asians notice this. I've seen many Latin American people notice it. I've seen a lot of people notice this hypocrisy from China. And it is, I believe, becoming an incredibly arrogant nation, because it is a rising superpower. You know, and it's almost like the religious sensitivity you get from a lot of Muslims. A lot, not all. Okay? I'm not going to generalize, but it's a bit like when the Prophet Muhammad is offended, then there's this righteous indignation from a lot of Islamists over the world. Well, we see the same thing whenever China is offended. You see this backlash from Chinese nationalists who rely on the strength of numbers. You know, it's a privilege. It's not a right to live in the West, and you should remember that. I'm just sick of it. I really do feel the behaviour of some of these people is a statement that they care much more about their homeland, China, than they do about their adopted nation. Now, my message is, if you're going to take the freedom of expression that exists in the United States, then that also comes with a certain degree of responsibility yourselves. That means that you need to speak out when Chinese racists come out with statements against Westerners, or black people for that matter. I mean, a few years back there was Chinese workers, I believe it was Nigeria, who were teaching this Nigerian guy very, very derogatory words about himself in Chinese, And of course he didn't understand what they were saying. He thought they were genuinely helping him, but all they were doing was telling him to call himself a monkey and so on. Now when this sort of thing happens, do we see outrage? No, we just see excuses. And I'm so sick of Chinese hypocrisy. I'm so sick of it. I'm not saying the West is perfect, far from it. Far from it. But at least in the West we acknowledge our problems. In the West we acknowledge that we have racism. When is China going to acknowledge its problems? I really do think it is. You know, America's an arrogant country in many ways, but the point is American people can see that arrogance, whether it be foreign policy or whatever. American people see that arrogance, and that's a difference here. Too many Chinese people don't seem to realize just how arrogant their country comes across in so many ways. I'm just so utterly fed up with it. And it's not a lack of objectivity from Westerners, it's more to do with Chinese arrogance. I admit I'm angry because it's just so astonishingly hypocritical. These people can't seem to realize it. And I guarantee you, I'll probably get comments on this video from idiotic Chinese nationalists who will come out with racist comments against myself. Either that or they'll make excuses for racists in China. And, you know. By the way, I'm not condoning what the kid said. I think actually it is unsettling that a child that young can have that sort of opinion. But they don't seem to be taking that factor on board, that it is just a kid. Children say stupid things. Can anyone who's protesting honestly say that as children they never said something stupid? It just so happens this kid done it on national television. Just extremely hypocritical. And I'm actually quite sick of it.